through the and the children that were taken from their families. I am also committed to eradicating hatred and violence by spreading love and light and tolerance and rights for all. So, welcome to our first Youth Civic Engagement event, which is brought to you through the Restorative Justice Project at Bilal Community and Family Center. Let me introduce you to our esteemed speaker for this event. Uzoma Asagwara is in Igbo Nigerian heritage, and they grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And in September 2019, Asagwara won the seat for MLA, which is the Member of Legislative Assembly from the Union Station riding under the NDP, the New Democratic Party. Asagwara goes by the pronoun they or them. And by profession, Uzoma is an addictions specialist, registered psychiatrist, nurse, educator, entrepreneur, mental health advocate, and now the NDP critic for health, seniors, and active living. Uzoma has volunteered in leadership positions with several organizations, including Queer People of Color Winnipeg, the Women's Health Clinic, and the Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art. Uzoma is a former basketball player with the University of Winnipeg and the Canadian national basketball team. Uzoma is a progressive and compassionate advocate for social justice, climate action, equity, and positive change for all families in Manitoba. Another thing that I am very proud to and would like to let you know about is that they were the first one to introduce the or passed the first bill marking the Somali Heritage Week. Somali Heritage Week is going to be between June 25th and July 1st that week, and it is an opportunity for all Manitobans to recognize and reflect on the history and culture of Somali regions in Africa and the diversity and immeasurable strength that Somali Canadians add to our communities. So we will be celebrating that with Bilal Community and Family Center as well. And you will find more about it in the subsequent days, hopefully. And so without further ado, I give you Uzoma.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I really appreciate the hard work that Bilal Family and Community Center does in our communities. And I actually wasn't aware until we met very recently about all of the work that your organization is doing. I don't know how you manage to do it all, but you do. And that's a testament to the good people who are leading the organization. So I want to say thank you to you folks for the invitation to be here today. I think it's really important to have forums and opportunities like this. I think it's great that it's being recorded so that other people can watch this at another time and can reference this as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. There's a lot that I could talk about in terms of the work that I do and my role as a legislator now, but I do actually want to hear from you folks, from people in terms of what their questions are. So I'll just maybe just talk about a few key things, if that's okay, in terms of the work that I do and sort of how I got to this place in my life. And then I'd really like to be able to hear from other people. One of the things that I will say first and foremost is that part of the reason why I grew up wanting to even be involved in community and to give back to community is because of organizations like Bilal. So I was born in Canada, born in Winnipeg. My parents immigrated from Nigeria in the late 1970s. And very quickly, alongside other West Africans, they would organize get-togethers and gatherings, and they started to form their own organizations in an attempt to make sure that their children who were being born in Canada could have community and could be proud of their heritage and their identities. And so for me, that has been a really important part of my journey. And so when I see organizations and community members making those efforts to inform and engage the youth, especially, I think, I know that I'm a direct result of those efforts growing up. And I know how invaluable and important that work is. I wanted to make sure that I extended my support for folks in the community who are reacting to, connected to, reflecting on the tragic, violent events in London, Ontario. That family that was targeted by um, by uh, by somebody with nothing but, unfortunately, hatred in his heart. And I want folks to know that myself and my NDP colleagues and our leader Wab Canoe, we support the community. We know that there's people of all different identities and beliefs and all of that, and we want folks to know that we support our communities. We support the Somali community, and we're here to amplify your voices and your needs and your concerns in government. We're in opposition right now, so unfortunately we're not the government side of things where we're making some of those decisions on a day-to-day basis. But as opposition, we work very hard to represent our communities and to make sure that each and every one of us in our capacity as legislators are bringing forward the concerns and the ideas and the hopes of the people that we represent. So I invite anyone and everyone to reach out to me, share your concerns, share your ideas. The Somali Heritage Week bill is a really good example of law that gets passed because people from community bring the ideas forward. So MPP Faisal Hassan in Ontario is actually the first person. He's an NDP representative. He's the first person in North America to pass that bill, the Somali Heritage Week Act. And it was folks in Manitoba, in the constituency of Union Station, who saw that happen and who brought that to me and asked if we in Manitoba could pass a bill like that. And it can be a very complicated, drawn out process to get a bill made into law. And a lot of times bills that are brought forward are never made into law, right? For whatever the reasons are, it can take a very long time, or sometimes it doesn't happen depending on what it is. The way that things worked out with this particular bill, the Somali Heritage Week Act, we were able to, within a very unexpected short amount of time, literally I'm talking like a matter of hours, we were able to, our House leader was able to negotiate getting that bill passed, which isn't something that happens very often at all in opposition. And so it's really a testament to people in the Somali community bringing the idea forward and then reaching out to different people in the community, including Bilal, to talk about this and make sure that there is support in getting it passed into the legislature and into law. So I look forward to supporting you folks as you celebrate it this year and every year moving forward here in Manitoba. I'm hopeful that once we get through this, you'll be able to extend your reach and hopefully bring in special guests from other places and whatever it is you want to do, we support. So how much time do I have to share a little bit here today?
So we have actually a lot of time. We said we'll go 2 hours maximum.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if we get more questions, we'll go long, but you have enough time. So go ahead, please.
Okay, so I won't take up too much time. Politicians, we can talk, but I won't take up too much time. I'll just say that, how I ended up being a politician today, like I said, it starts very, very early on in terms of the example that was set by the leaders in my community, Nigerian and African and Black community growing up. It was really me being able to see my parents and other people's parents and elders in our community fight for the rights of people in our communities and organize and make sure that we had opportunities just like every other kid growing up in Canada was able to access. And so as I journeyed throughout my life, I played basketball for a long time. I played at the University of Winnipeg. I played on the Canadian national basketball team. But all while I was being an athlete, I was studying, I was going to school, I was, working and volunteering. And I got my degree in science, a Bachelor of Science in Psychiatric Nursing. And so when I retired from basketball, I started my career as a nurse, and I felt a big void in my life, no longer being an athlete, which was like my full-time, it was my full-time job. You're trying to go to the Olympics. At that time, we were trying to go to the Olympics in Beijing, China. And so you literally, everything you do, what you eat, how you sleep, where you go, all of that is around that one goal and opportunity. And so when I retired, I was working as a nurse, but I still had a lot of time on my hands. It just felt like I had a lot of extra resource. And I wanted to commit to contributing and giving back to the very communities that I was a part of and who had given me so much throughout my life. And so I started to really focus on sort of doing community organizational work and also kind of being an activist, not only in healthcare in my job, but also in our communities and building relationships that way. And it was through my job and through doing this work and activism in communities and volunteering and building relationships from that place that eventually the opportunity to run in an election was presented to me. Somebody actually asked me if I would have any interest in running. And at that point, I was like, absolutely not. I had never even thought about it. It had never occurred to me that politics was something that I should or that I even could pursue. And I was at a point in my career where I was going to meetings with folks who did work in government. I was sitting around tables with folks who are advocates at a national and international level and learning from some really amazing people. I sat on a committee that advised the former government and the former NDP government. And the first meeting I went to on this council, there was a presentation by Cindy Blackstock. And if you're not familiar with who she is, you can just Google Cindy Blackstock and it'll come up and you'll know she is a tireless, fearless, and tenacious advocate for First Nations children, for Indigenous children and families. She has taken the federal government to court and won. And her case against the federal government was that they were under-resourcing, underfunding Indigenous children. And as a result, Indigenous children are having poor outcomes in many ways versus what other children are facing. And, she presented at the first meeting I went to on this council, and I was totally inspired. I was blown away by the work that she was able to do and the relationships that she had in doing her work. And, despite being in all of these spaces and meeting these folks, when somebody asked me if I would consider running, I realized in that moment, it had never occurred to me that that was something that I could pursue. And a part of the reason why is because to that point, there had never been a Black person elected to the Manitoba legislature in Manitoba. So I literally, my entire life, to that point, had never seen a Black person in government in Manitoba. And that is not only totally unacceptable for so many reasons, but when you don't see yourself represented in a place, then you don't believe or understand that you can aspire to be there. And so I didn't run in that election. It wasn't the right time for me. There was a lot that, if you're going to run in an election, there's a lot that you need to think about and prepare for and all of that. But I knew by the 2019, it was called early, but the 2019 election, I knew I wanted to run. And I knew that the place for me to run would be Union Station, which is the constituency of downtown Winnipeg, because I've been connected in some way, shape, or form to that community basically my whole life. The church that I grew up attending is in the constituency. The spaces that my parents and other people in the community would rent so that all of us could gather during holiday events was in downtown Winnipeg. It wasn't easy back then for, 30, 40 African families to find a place where they could rent and let their kids sort of just run around and be kids and explore and all of that. And they built good relationships with some places downtown, and they were able to do that. I went to school and university. I volunteer in the community. I've worked in healthcare in the community. And so it was a good fit. And, it took a lot of work to make that happen, because there was a lot of things that I had to take into consideration that other people, I don't think, have to think about, right? I realized that people probably have never seen Uzoma Asagwara on a ballot before, right? They've never seen that very African name on a ballot. People have never maybe not only seen that name, but also known somebody who is African, who's an activist, who is an advocate for the Two-Spirit and LGBT community, who's unapologetic about being anti-racist. I talk about white supremacy and how we have to dismantle that. If people are being racist, I tell them they're being racist. These are not things that people are totally always comfortable with. And certainly they're all political things, whether we like it or not. But because there'd never been a Black person elected at that level, those aren't topics that are coming up in the political conversation or in the media or talked about in the legislature on a daily basis, because there's nobody who's had those experiences ever in that building in that way. And so we worked really, really hard. It was a community effort. It was a family effort. It was a team effort. And we were fortunate to be successful and win in the last election. And one of the things that really struck me was that before the election, when I was thinking about whether or not I would run in this most recent election, I was making that final decision. There are a few folks in my life who have been elected, they're Indigenous women, Indigenous community members. And they told me that, Uzoma, if you get elected, this is something that can be transformative for your community. And they were sharing this with me from their experiences and their perspective as Indigenous people and the impacts it's had in their community. And I really do believe that it's so important for us as Black people, as Africans, to have strong, positive relationships with Indigenous peoples, with the First Peoples of these lands. And I took what they said to heart. I took it very seriously. And sure enough, after the election was over, I received, I know I didn't even get to all the messages, so many messages from people all around the world, from Nigerians all around the world, from Africans all around the world. People who said, I can't believe you did it. Like, I can't believe we're there. It's amazing. They would see my name and they would know right away, that's an Igbo Nigerian. They would know right away where my family comes from. And so I realized in that moment that they were totally correct, that it's something that is much bigger than just me. And I knew that before the election, that it's not about me as an individual, it's about a community. It's about what we can collectively achieve and the importance of our collective representation in government, where decisions are made every day that affect our communities, affect our children, affect our elders. And so my hope now, and my responsibility, quite frankly, now, is to make sure that there are more of us, that there are more Africans, Black community members, more underrepresented groups represented in government. It's very, very important that, it's actually more important that we not only get elected, but that we keep the door open for other people who want those opportunities and who want to be engaged in this part of the political process. So, I love having conversations like this, because it's an opportunity for me to learn about what the concerns are from folks and ideas that people have, but also to let people know that you can do it and you should do it, right? There's nothing that can stop you outside of yourself. If you want to pursue this, you can get it done. And there are people who are thrilled and happy to support you. So I think I'm gonna leave it there if that's okay. And I'm happy to answer any questions or just have a conversation a bit more about my work and our work as the NDP and government and all of that.
Thank you so much for, sharing your journey with us. And I will encourage all the participants here to, turn on your mic and ask a question. I mean, we have somebody here that we can use this opportunity to learn from Uzoma. So, and I really want to just reiterate what Uzoma was saying, that when we don't see ourselves represented at a level, we think that it's impossible to get there. So I'm so glad that you were elected and you ran and you decided to run. So yeah, it's just such a, it does make a difference. And I really like that you're saying that you are ready to support anyone who would like to do that. So I think this is so much important for our youth to hear. So yeah, thank you so much for that. So anyone, if you have questions about what Uzoma is doing, what kind of work she's doing, what is she, all the other projects maybe she's involved in, what is she currently working on, and all of that, ask. And even if it's a very small question, ask, because this is an opportunity here. So go ahead, please.
Hi, Uzoma. My name is Bashi Gele. I'm a student at the University of Manitoba, and I just had a question. The Progressive Conservative Party was pushing Bill 64, and I was just wondering, what are you and your team? I know one of your colleagues, Jamie Moses, MLA for St. Vital. It was really fresh seeing your faces at the last election, representing us and being people of color in the legislature. I was wondering what you guys are doing to fight Bill 64.
Well, thank you so much for your question, Avashi. That's a great question. And I'm glad to know that you're a post-secondary student and you're thinking politically and you're asking political questions. That's great. When I was in university, to be completely honest, if someone had said, what do you think about Bill 64? I would have been like, what's Bill 64? I didn't know what was going on with bills and legislation. So I love the fact that you know what's going on in that building. So Bill 64 is a pretty concerning piece of legislation. It is meant to, the PCs, the conservative government, are saying that it's in response to an education review, and that this bill is going to modernize, that's their language, modernize the education system here in Manitoba. But for those who don't know, Bill 64 is quite damaging, actually. And it's actually a piece of legislation that is very much like a bill that was passed in Nova Scotia. And in Nova Scotia, they are now picking up the pieces of a tattered education system as a result of that bill. So we know that the way that this bill is structured doesn't work. We've already seen that happen elsewhere. And we also know that it disadvantages communities that I'm a part of, certainly. So it consolidates areas of the province, school divisions, and it ensures that there's minimal amount of voices representing those areas. So basically what you're doing is you're eliminating the ability for as many people as possible in our communities to speak up on behalf of their communities. There's a lot in the bill. It's extensive, but the spirit of the bill is not one that supports local voices, local people, and moves us in a direction of fairness and equity in education, quite frankly. It's very, very concerning. And so what we decided to do as an opposition caucus is delay Bill 64. This government introduced an astounding number of bills when we were in the legislature this time around. And to the point where, unfortunately, we can't stop the majority of their legislation. We just can't. There's no process or mechanism for us to do so. The best that we could do was delay what we can and let people know what these bills mean, let people know what's going on and how they can be informed and how they can push back against a bill like 64. So we have actively delayed Bill 64. It has not passed. We delayed it until the fall. So right now we're not in the legislature. We call it sitting when we're there every day. And then we say that we rise when we're no longer in the House every day and we're in our constituencies full time. So we go back to the House in October, to the legislature in October. And that's when people are going to have the opportunity to present at the legislature and let the government know what they think about Bill 64. And as of right now, it's looking like there could be a record number of people in the community who are going to present on this bill. I believe the majority of them presenting against this bill, not in favor of Bill 64. There's almost, I think when I last checked, there was over 330 people, presenters signed up to present about Bill 64. So we're actively letting people know what the bill is about. We've got a website right now. You can find it at manitobandp.com, where people can learn about Bill 64. We have town halls every couple of weeks about the bill. We have signed a number of people up for our mailing list about this particular piece of legislation. And, you know, our job is to make sure that people know what the government's doing to try and make education not as strong as it should be. And the best way that I can compare Bill 64 would be to compare it to what the government did in the healthcare system. So the government took office and immediately, right out of the gate, they started to attack nurses and healthcare workers. They made huge cuts in our healthcare system. And unfortunately, now we're seeing that if there's a crisis, even before the pandemic, we already knew that our healthcare system was in big trouble. There was huge vacancy rates. Nurses were quitting, healthcare workers were quitting. They couldn't manage the burden of the healthcare system because they didn't have the resources. And that's essentially the approach they're taking to education. So if you can take a look at healthcare right now and see just how difficult things are in our healthcare system, you can imagine what things are going to look like in education. And unfortunately, as a result of their cuts, you know, them introducing this bill, we've already seen a number of educators lose their jobs. Lots of educational assistants have lost their jobs. Lots of teachers have lost their jobs. And teachers are having to pay more and more out of their own personal resource to educate their students. And that's not okay. So those are just a few of the things we're going to do and we are doing to try and stop this bill. And you never know, you know, maybe if people put enough pressure on the government, they'll pull the bill. You know, we try to remind them every opportunity that we can that they need to throw Bill 64 into the garbage and they need to come back to the drawing table and listen to people's concerns and bring something forward that actually helps families. And Bill 64 doesn't help families at all. So thank you so much for your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering, since we've seen our government really like lacking in proper leadership with how they've like responded to the pandemic and people getting sick, what can the minority government do against the big government like the premier?
That's a great question. So are you asking, and is it Ahmed who's asking?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your question. And so are you asking what we can do as an opposition to push back against this government?
Yeah, as an opposition, but also like MLAs and
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So one of the things that I have found to be most important as an individual MLA is to make sure that the people I represent have the information. So one thing that we've seen from this government is the fact that their leadership is not strong, right? The premier, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm brutally honest about this, and I'm someone who, even if we're on opposite sides, right? We're not on the same team. And I learned this as an athlete, as a basketball player. You know, I went to the University of Winnipeg and the Bisons, the University of Manitoba, where our #1 rivals, our biggest competitors. And every time we played them, it was like we couldn't stand each other. However, if you're good, you're good. If you're a good basketball player, I'm going to say you're a good basketball player. I'm going to give you the credit that you deserve. If you win fair and square, I'm giving you credit. I'm acknowledging your success. You're doing good things. And so with this government, with the PC government, you know, if there are good decisions that they've made, I'm not going to be the person who shies away from acknowledging that. I think it's important for people to know, you know, the good things and as well to know the not so good things. Unfortunately, what we're seeing with this government is they consistently make really bad decisions, and that their leadership is more concerned about how he looks as a leader versus how he helps Manitobans. And it's been disappointing to see that not a single PC MLA has gone against any decision the premier has made, not a single one of them. And that's really concerning when you see the legislation and the bills that they're passing and that they're trying to pass, right? So, you know, there's been legislation they passed. And I'll give you a good example. Bill 71 is something they passed very recently. And that's a bill that, that would see people get a rebate on their property taxes, education property taxes. And what it does, however, and they're saying this is a good thing, it puts money back in the pockets of folks, but what it actually does, it gets rid of a credit, a tax credit that renters were able to access. And so when I think about the folks that I represent, right, in Union Station, where our constituency is 90% apartments and condos, it's not single family residences on single household properties. All of the renters in the 90% of the constituency, which is huge, it's a significant amount of our community, are going to lose that tax credit, which helps make their life more affordable. And in fact, the people who benefit from that tax credit, that tax rebate rather, are wealthy people. It's people like the premier. It's people who have $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 worth of education property taxes that they're paying. It's people who own buildings that have 300 units. It's people that own 6 different properties. That's who that's benefiting. And it's unfortunately hurting people who are low income, who don't own property, and who, quite frankly, many of those folks are busy working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet, raising their families, you know, getting by day to day. So they wouldn't even necessarily be aware that this bill is being presented and passed. And so, you know, it's when things like that happen, we need to let people know. We need to fight back against that. We do things like bring forward amendments. And so we do our best to, if we know, okay, we can't stop this bill completely, we're going to bring forward amendments, ways that we can change certain parts of that bill to make it better for the people that we know it's going to affect. And so there's a number of ways that we can try and slow down, stop, or improve decisions the government is making. But I would have to say the biggest and most important thing for us to do is to educate people. It's to let people know what's going on and to let people know that you can make a difference. That if you write the person who represents you, if you call their office and let them know your concerns, if you demand to meet with them, right? If you say, I want to meet with you, I have concerns about this, or I don't understand this, I want to learn more about it. It's our job to meet with you and to listen to you and to bring your concerns into the Manitoba legislature. So I encourage people to reach out to us, to talk to us, to bring your community's voices to those tables and into those spaces. And then as a team, you know, as a team, we each have a responsibility to learn our roles and what we do and do it well. But as a team, we bring that all together and we start working on developing policies and practices that are going to help us be a good government when we form government, right? It's not just about holding this government accountable. It's also about making sure that when we become the government at some point, that we're prepared to govern in a good way, and that we've built the relationships with community members and community organizations in a good way so that once we form government, we can just hit the ground running and get to good work.
Okay, thanks. And I was also wondering, with how you're bringing up bills, how do I, as a citizen, keep up with what the premier is doing other than social media?
Good question. That's another good question. You're asking questions that most people, to be honest, a lot of folks don't ask. And it's great because the information is all there. It's all on the internet. So if you have access to the internet, you can go on the Manitoba government website, and you can go to the Legislative Assembly website, and you can look at all of the bills that have been introduced in the House. You can actually go on the website and you can take a look at the bills that haven't been introduced yet, but have been put on what we call the order papers. So they've been put on schedule to be introduced. And it's interesting because the government did something unheard of, actually. The PC government this year actually introduced a bunch of legislation without any of the content of the bills, which is it's undemocratic, actually, because nobody, the public and us as MLAs, nobody was able to actually understand what these bills were because there was no content to them. And they did this with 19 bills, which we made a huge fuss around, and many people did in the community, because you can read the title of a bill and you can kind of get an idea of what it might be referring to or referencing, but you can't do any research to know whether or not you can support it, or you're against it, or you want to make your voice heard on it. It's just never been done. It's not a very it's not a democratic way to do policy and to engage in the process with the public. And so that was something that we really made very public. The media was all over that, because even for the media, right, their job is to report on what's going on. They didn't even have the information in front of them to be able to do that. So there's a number of ways that you can find out. I would say the best way to stay on top of what's going on is definitely the website. You can actually, when we're in session, you can watch us in the chamber, in the legislature. They stream and they televise our question periods every day. And that's when we're asking the government ministers direct questions about decisions that are being made. It's a really good way for people to see the premier's true colors, I say. There's a lot in politics that is very colonial. It's very, very old school, British parliamentary process. Some of it, I don't know why we still do it, but it's just the way things are still being done. And it's fascinating to see. It's definitely, for me, been really interesting to be there and witness it firsthand. But you can also just watch. You can watch when we're in different committees and talking about different bills. You can see how different ministers answer, or most often for them, not answer questions. And I think that's a really, really important way for people to see how their elected officials behave in government. It's a really good way for you to see how people are representing you, and you can follow up with them and you can let them know directly what you think. So thanks for that question. It's a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing questions coming anymore. I mean, there's so much I'm learning myself, and thank you so much for these amazing questions, everyone.
Hi, Uzoma. My name is Suad. I have a quick question. It's more on the personal side, but what are some of the major obstacles you felt you faced as a young Black woman in becoming an MLA, and what are some positive ways you dealt with that?
Thank you for that question, Suad. That's a great question. And I'm brutally honest about my experience in politics and getting here, because I never want for people to not feel prepared or to not feel as though they don't know the truth of what this journey can look like. And so I really appreciate that question. And for me, it's not complicated, but there's layers to my experience, right? Like, I'm first generation, but I was born and raised here. I'm a queer person, right? I use neutral pronouns, but I certainly present the way I present. And so being in all of those identities and being really open about those things, right? Because for me, it was really important to not have to hide any part of who I am to do this job. I want people to know, especially young Black people, to know that you can be yourself. You should be your whole self and pursue this path. That actually the way that you can be most successful is by embracing who you are and surrounding yourself with people who embrace you for who you are and leading in life in that way. And so the reality of that for me is that there are some situations and there are some barriers that come up. One thing I would say, in terms of what some barriers are, it's 2021, but let's be real. There are definitely some men out there in our communities and all communities who still hold very old school sexist ways of thinking about who should be in politics or who should be taking the lead or whose voice should be heard in making decisions. I would say that the majority of people, the majority of men that I've interacted with are super supportive. They're thrilled for me to be doing the work that I'm doing. They are happy for this opportunity to also be something that other people see they can pursue. The majority of people are awesome. There's going to be a few people who try to criticize you, who try to make you feel like you don't belong, who make you feel like you need to have a perfect resume and a perfect life in order to be worthy of running. And what I would say is, those are the voices of people who want to plant those seeds of doubt within you. And those aren't the voices you need to listen to. The barriers that you're going to face do include sexism. They do include racism. They do include misogyny. They do include all of those things. But again, overwhelmingly, most people are supportive. Most people know that it's a good thing and it's important for us to be in these spaces, in the roles that we're in. And it's those people that I look to and that I lean on for support and that I build those relationships with. The few voices who need to make themselves very heard are not the voices of the many. They're not. And, I think about on social media is a really good example. There's always a few trolls on social media who show up and have negative things to say. But those people, I just think of them as like very unhappy people whose agenda is not the agenda of the majority of us, right? The majority of us are trying to just live our lives in a good way and give back in our communities. And so that's who I choose to focus on. One of the things that I would definitely say is really important, knowing that you're going to face challenges, knowing that if you're not, somebody who was deemed male or female or male at birth, let's say, and you identify as male and you have a lot of money. Like if you don't have all of these sort of privileges, right? You should just know that there may be circumstances and challenges that you face that people who have certain privileges may not face. That being said, there are so many people who are willing and wanting to support you and us in succeeding. I would not have been elected had it not been for the community. I would not have been elected had it not been for people who supported me, who showed up for me, who believe in me. We don't do these things by ourselves. And so it's critically important to focus on those relationships as a way of overcoming those hurdles, getting over those barriers, and knowing you don't have to do those things by yourself.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Do we have any more?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name is Bushra Adin. I'm in grade 10. And my question is that there are multiple issues that strain relations between Indigenous communities and the government, such as the continuation of the Keystone XL project and other projects by Manitoba Hydro, taking Indigenous lands and ruining the environment, the livelihood, and resources that Indigenous communities depend on. The water boil advisories that are still to this day in place, even even though clean water is a human right, and there really isn't a reason why a first world country like Canada has citizens who don't have access to clean water. And even recently, when the 215 children were found, instead of immediately listening to the citizens demanding they dig up the other sites, they chose to ignore that as well. So my question is there an actual plan to get these things done? And how would you go about fixing these very prominent issues?
Bushra! Great question. Wow. That's an outstanding question. I really appreciate the way that you laid that out. Brilliant and important. And, you know, at the heart of what you're saying, you're talking about truth and reconciliation. And that is something we haven't seen from the provincial government. It's not something we've seen from the federal government. And I can certainly appreciate that the horrifying, devastating reality of finding 215 Indigenous children out in Kamloops, BC, should have been, if there is ever a moment to just finally have the political will to make the right decisions, it was that moment. And we're still not seeing that in political leadership like we should be. So what I can tell you is that, and I'm very, very proud to be able to say that I serve in a caucus led by Indigenous people. Our leader is an Indigenous man, our House leader is an Indigenous woman, our caucus chair is an Indigenous woman. Our caucus has the first Indigenous woman elected in Manitoba. In our caucus, we've got a representative, Ian, who represents, where does Ian, my goodness, I always block on this, I apologize. Ian represents, it'll come to me, I'll be right back to that. But we've got these incredible leaders in our caucus, and I don't say that to tokenize anybody, I say that because quite literally, they're incredible leaders. And when we talk about what representation looks like in a caucus and in government, it's not just about being a Black person or being an Indigenous person or being an LGBT member of the community and being elected. It's actually about how do you make sure that the voices of our communities are actually represented in government. And we have got some incredible people who not only work within our team to hold the government accountable, but actually work within our team to hold our team accountable, right? It's not good enough or acceptable for us to say that the government is wrong and they have to do better. We have to be able to look at ourselves as individuals and collectively and say, what are we going to do better? Where have we not done enough? And so, yes, we work really hard to hold the government accountable. Yes, we work really hard to fight and push for Indigenous rights to be upheld and respected and acknowledged. But we also do the work within our own caucus and our own team to make sure that when we're looking at policies and when we're looking at what we want to do when we govern, that truth and reconciliation are at the heart of those efforts and of those policies. And in order to do that, you have to understand how colonization and how systemic racism work. You have to understand how they function in our systems. So me as the critic for health, I need to understand, and I needed to understand this as a healthcare provider. How do those things affect healthcare in Manitoba? How do those things manifest in healthcare in Manitoba? You know, what are communities, what are Indigenous communities, First Nations communities asking for, in need of? How can I support these folks and these groups and these peoples to have better outcomes? And a really recent, current, example right now, I would say would be the First Nations Pandemic Response Team. That's a great example for us to look to in terms of how effective an effort and initiative can be when it's led by the very people who are most affected by these circumstances, right? The First Nations Pandemic Response Team is led by First Nations public health experts, doctors, community leaders, And they've had a tremendous success, start to finish, during this pandemic, right, to where we're at, whether it's their COVID testing, whether it's their vaccine rollouts, right? When our government was not getting people vaccinated at the rates that we needed to, First Nations communities led by the First Nations Pandemic Response Team were sharing their vaccines beyond their communities, making sure non-Indigenous people were also vaccinated, right? They have communicated information beautifully. They have made sure that their knowledge keepers, their elders, were vaccinated first, and in a way that made them comfortable and safe, in order to protect the knowledge within their communities, intergenerational teachings in their communities. So, you know, supporting efforts like that, recognizing how important it is for communities to take the lead, and because they are their experts, right? And not getting in the way of good outcomes, because I think so often that's what we're seeing happen is, in fact, politicians and governments can actually get in the way of First Nations communities, Indigenous peoples, having the outcomes that they know that they can have and that they deserve to have. So, you know, it's a value thing. It's an understanding how systemic discrimination and colonization functions and how it impacts. It's committing to having meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities and leaders, and understanding that we should be letting Indigenous folks lead the way and determine the way things look and operate for their communities, because that's how we're going to see good success. So, you know, that kind of, a lot of that boils down to political will, having the political will to do what needs to be done, and to stop making it about anything else other than we need to do the right thing. We have to have the will to do the right thing. And we also have to recognize that it's actually those decisions that will benefit absolutely everybody. Making those good decisions benefits everyone, actually. And that's something that we need to get our heads around as well. I hope I answered your question properly for you there.
You did, thank you.
Oh, and my colleague's constituency is Kiwatanuk.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Abdi Fatah. I'm currently a first-year university student, and as a Black woman in politics, what would you say is not only your biggest challenge in finding your way into politics, but as you're in politics right now, what is currently your biggest challenge?
It's a great question. Abdi Fatah, thank you for your question. You know, I would say more than anything, I identify as just a gender non-conforming person. I'm just Uzoma. Like, it might seem strange, but like, I really am just Uzoma. My mom and I were talking about this just last week. She's so funny. And we were talking about what I was like as a kid, as a child. And she was like, you know, I thought so much about you as a kid. And she's like, you've always just been Uzoma. You never identified as a girl. You were like, no, I'm just me. And I've always been just Uzoma. So that's kind of where I situate myself. But, you know, one of the biggest challenges I would say I face now, and that's a really good question, because I think that we're all facing some pretty big challenges right now, right? We're in this pandemic. We see in this pandemic that the concerns and the areas where there's a lack of fairness, where inequity exists, we're not seeing those areas close and get smaller. We're seeing them get wider and bigger, right? We're seeing inequities grow. We're seeing gaps in the ways in which folks can access what they need grow. We're seeing the wealthy I don't even know that you can call those folks wealthy anymore. When you have trillions of dollars and several billions of dollars, you're no longer wealthy. You're like on a totally different level, different playing field altogether. And then we're seeing, folks who are low income, living in poverty, struggling even more, going without even more resource. And so I would say, for me right now, one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing as a legislator is on effectively communicating that reality and in making sure that the folks who are most affected by what's going on are truly represented, and not necessarily like it's important for me to represent those folks, but it's just as important for those communities and those individuals to have the information and the resources that they need in order to help us collectively make the decisions that need to happen moving forward. So, you know, it's really challenging in my job to connect with people if the only way we can safely connect is virtually, right? Like for me, one of the best ways to connect with my constituents, with our constituents, is to just go out and be in the community. Go to Central Park and go play soccer on a Wednesday evening, you know? And I was training all winter, hoping that this summer I would be in better shape and I could actually go play soccer for more than 5 or 10 minutes and not have to sit down. But, you know, we haven't been able to go play soccer yet and meet people that way. I love being able to go and knock on everybody's doors, go door knocking in the community and meet people face to face. Haven't been able to do that either. So one of the biggest challenges is honestly just connecting with the people that I care about and that I represent, and making sure that they have what they need, making sure that if there's a way that I can help them, that I'm doing that, and that, you know, whatever is going on for them that we need to address in government, that I'm totally aware of, and that they're aware we're here for them in that way. So it's finding creative ways to connect with people during this pandemic, and also making sure that as we get through this pandemic, we're not leaving people behind. Right? We want to make sure that we all get through this pandemic, because we're all in this pandemic, but we're not all in this pandemic the same way. So it's important to recognize that and figure out how to meet people where they're at. And actually, you know what, if I could add to that, I'm just going to quickly add to that on a personal level. Like that was a very, you know, political challenges in my job sort of response, but on a personal level, in terms of who I am and my identity's challenges in this job, I would definitely say that it's very clear that there are people who are not accustomed to someone like myself being elected, and they are not accustomed to hearing someone talk about anti-Black racism. They're not accustomed to someone talking about the issues that I raise in the legislature, or the ways in which I'm comfortable with who I am, right, in the legislature. They're very, if you think about it, a lot of the folks who are elected right now, and I'll just speak specifically to MLAs in the Manitoba legislature, there are many, many people who are elected right now who have never been in that building, in that chamber, with another MLA that was Black, ever. There are folks who've been elected for 20 years, who this is the first time they've ever had a Black person stand up in the House and address the chamber and talk about the Black community in this way, or talk about the racism that Black people face in Manitoba, or talk about certain community groups in Manitoba that they've never heard of or that they don't pay any attention to, because quite frankly, there are some MLAs who make it very clear that they don't really care a whole lot about the Black organizations in Manitoba, that they're not really invested in building relationships with those organizations. And so I think there's a few folks who have been quite jarred by me being there and talking about certain things. And, you know, it's my belief that it's important to do the work that I do unapologetically, and to demand and to expect that everybody in government take very seriously Black community members, that everybody in government respect and uplift and celebrate and listen to African community members and organizations, that our communities and our voices are just as important as anybody else's and deserve to be heard and fought for in the Manitoba legislature. And I will never apologize for that. And I'll continue to do that work. And, that means that sometimes people get a little, I think, uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that, because there's going to be more of us in there. There's probably going to be people on this call today who maybe are going to be MLAs at some point, or maybe you're going to be an MP, or maybe you're going to be a city councilor, right? But whatever it is you choose to do, just know that, we deserve to be in those spaces, and our communities deserve to be represented there. Absolutely.
Zahra, you were going to go?
Hi, I have a question. My name is Khair, and I'm one of the facilitators. I just have like the PC government have really blundered the handling of the pandemic, especially when our premier sent patients outside of the province for them being like budget concierge. That should be very expensive. So my question is, what grassroots organization can you recommend for us so that we can make sure we never let them forget what they did to us this whole year? So
yeah. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. And I really appreciate you bringing up a very recent, it's happening right now, issue. And if you ever needed an example of just how badly, and I like the word that you used, they've blundered this pandemic, it is the fact that we are the only jurisdiction in the country, we're the only province in the country that is sending the sickest patients in our hospitals to other provinces to receive ICU care. It is unheard of that that's the decision that's being forced upon healthcare providers to be made. That, I've talked to doctors in Ontario, I've talked to ICU doctors in Ontario who were forced in their own province under a conservative government to send patients maybe 100 kilometers to a different hospital. And they didn't want to do that. They were like, we didn't want to send our ICU patient, a few blocks away because it's so high risk. And in Manitoba, you're sending patients thousands of kilometers away. You're flying them to other provinces. Like, it's unheard of. It's unconscionable that this is where we're at in the pandemic. And, if you folks, if there are people who want to make sure that this government understands that people will not forget that, nor should people forget that, then people need to organize and get around voting them out in the next election. That's really what it comes down to. There's not, like I said earlier, every single member of that PC caucus, and I'm going to get very partisan now, I'm going to be very NDP right now, but every single member of that caucus has voted in favor for every decision that they've made. Every single one. And I've asked questions of the former Minister of Health, the same Minister of Health who blamed doctors, said doctors were trying to cause chaos, who said that the deaths that happened in personal care homes were unavoidable. The same same former Minister of Health who outright refused to send staffing help to personal care homes when they asked for it. I've asked him questions, got no answers. The current Minister of Health got no answers about how they're going to address these issues. The acting Minister of Health right now is he was the original Minister of Health when they formed government, who started all the healthcare cuts. And so it's interesting now that he's the acting Minister of Health, as the current one is on medical leave. And he is now faced with the realities of the decisions that he made, even though nurses and doctors and healthcare aides pleaded with them not to make those cuts and decisions. He's now facing the consequences of his decision-making. The number of beds that he chose to cut from ICUs were at first a number of patients that we had to send out of the province to other places because we didn't have the staffing in the beds here. So what folks really need to do is to organize and come prepared in the next election to make a decision, right? Are folks going to choose to elect a government that every single member of that team, of that PC caucus, has been okay with the way things are going? Every single member of that caucus has voted for the decisions that have gotten us to where we are now in Manitoba, where we see some of the highest rates of women being unemployed during this pandemic and women having the hardest time getting re-employed in this pandemic. And the government has refused, outright refused, to have a gender equity lens on their recovery plan and their decision making. They basically just said, like, it is what it is. A government that has attacked childcare, cut childcare, made it more difficult for people to get their children into childcare spots. They refuse to provide resources for childcare centers, and now some of them are closing. In my own constituency, there are childcare centers, daycares, that have to go to food banks to feed the kids that they provide care for because they have no resources. They have Winnipeg Harvest dropping off milk for them because they have no resources because the government has frozen and cut their funding. You know, we see this government, even though we saw the tragedies that happened in personal care homes, they cut funding to personal care homes and long-term care in their new budget. They didn't give them any more resource, any more money. So people have to look at those decisions and decide whether or not those are the values in a government that you want after the next election. And what I can tell you is that we are working very, very hard to make sure that we do everything in our power to get the PCs out and so that we can form government. Because we have done the work of listening and building relationships. And that's not to say that, you know, we're perfect. Our job is to make sure that you folks hold us accountable, right? My responsibility is, you know, Bilal needs to know that they can call me or they can email me and they can say, hey, Uzoma, have you thought about this? Or our community needs that, or this thing that you folks said in the media, we don't agree with that actually, and we want to talk to you about it. I'm available to have those conversations, and I'm committed to listening so that we can work together to make sure that good decisions are made that help our communities, not hurt our communities. So I encourage you, again, reach out if you're looking for other ways to get involved, to make sure the government hears your voice and to make sure that they know that you're aware of the decisions they've made and how they've hurt people. Then I'm 100% available to have those conversations and do that work with you. So thank you for that question.
I saw Zahra
Hi, Uzoma. Thanks for
once.
Oh,
I saw Zahra once
Yeah, go ahead.
unmuting herself. Is she going to ask a question? No? Anyone else? Because you've brought really good questions today. Yeah, amazing questions. We had a few more people join, I think. And if you have something to say, please, you can join in the conversation. Antenna, do you want to maybe ask a question
All right,
yourself?
thank you, Humera. Yeah. So, I'm Anthony again, and I'm one of the facilitators. So we have been like organizing a program, especially like tailored for the Black people, and like, you know, some people were considered to be disadvantaged and marginalized in terms of like the mainstream communities interaction. And like we had like invited some guests and then try let them, you know, share their experiences. And like what I've learned is it seems like, you know, there is a kind of like invisible systematic barriers that are affecting like youth, like in especially like, you know, the Black community. So like in your career, like so far, have you like come up with those kind of like invisible you know, systematic barriers and racism that are affecting the Black youth? If you can share us that experience, that would be awesome. Yeah.
sure. I thank you for that question. That's a really important question because, and I like the word that you used, invisible, systemic and systematic barriers, because so often, especially youth, are faced with challenges other people are not. Black youth are faced with challenges other people are not. But it's not like you can say, this is what happened and this is why I'm not getting this job, or this is why I'm having this experience. And I can relate to that. And I think actually as far back as when I retired from basketball and I was looking for a job as a nurse, I had an amazing resume. Amazing. I'm just going to say that honestly. Like, you know, I volunteered at all of these different places. I had great nursing practicums. I was a great student. I was like basically an A or B student my whole career academically. I was on the Canadian national basketball team. You know, like I had a really good resume. I had great references, and I could not get a job. Could not get a job. My first job was out of the city because I couldn't get a call back even at any facility or hospital in Winnipeg. Thankfully, you know, I got an interview outside of the city, but I didn't have a car. I had no way of getting there, right? I hadn't needed a car. I lived downtown. I walked everywhere. And so I had to take the Greyhound bus to that job interview. And I know the Greyhound is now going to stop running, but I had to take the Greyhound bus. It only ran at certain times. So I got to my job interview like an hour and a half early in this small town community that I wasn't from. And I just sat in like a breakfast diner, waited till I could start walking. I had to time it just right so that I would get to my interview not too late, right? Because I was like, I'm going to be walking. I'm going to be sweaty and tired. I've got to give myself time to relax. And that was the way I got my first job. And it's interesting because I had interviewed at one place and not gotten a job there. And then maybe a couple of years later, I interviewed again for a job at this place and I got the job. And after working there for some time, I was working there full time and I was working at my other first job part-time. I was working a lot. And I'd been working there for some time when there were other folks being interviewed for other jobs. And very casually, one of my supervisors very casually said, "Oh yeah, I remember when you applied and we were going through the pile of resumes." She says to me, "I didn't want to have to try and pronounce your name. And so I actually put your resume on the bottom of the pile and just kept going through with everyone else." And she laughed. And she said that to me like it was nothing. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is the same place I applied to work at years ago when nobody called me back. And I was thinking to myself, wow, she doesn't even realize how offensive and how racist what she's just said is. And not only that it was racist, but that's how systemic racism works, right? That what if she had never gotten to the bottom of the pile again to get to my resume? I just wouldn't have been called. I wouldn't have had the opportunity. And so that to me is a really concrete example of what we face. And again, when I think about the fact that when I was running in the election, when I was going, I thought about how folks would react to my name. And it's because moments like that happen where someone tells you how they reacted to my name, that it affects the way you think about opportunities down the road. Right. And so, it wasn't like I thought about that. I just knew, you know, down the road, okay, I'm going to make sure that I get my name out there early so people can see my name, get used to seeing my name. That's how systemic racism functions. It's a very concrete thing that, you know, someone put your resume at the bottom of a pile. I never would have known had she not told me. It's an experience that you have that is always in the back of your mind and has you think about that and other experiences in your life. So there are very real challenges and very real barriers that I know that Black youth face, that other youth do not face. And that for me is why it's so important. It's so important for people who have those experiences to name them, to talk about them, so that there's no secrets around it. We know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. Right? Because it's happened to me. And so I'm going to talk about it and I'm going to say it's wrong and it's unacceptable and it will not be tolerated. Then it's so important for us to be in those positions where we're doing the hiring, you know, where we're looking at resumes, when we're in those spaces, so that, you know, we have the representation at those levels to push back against those things and to make sure that those things don't happen. Right? And so, you know, if there are youth that are facing challenges, if there are situations that come up where you know something's not quite right, but you're not quite sure how to express that or how to deal with that, you can always reach out to people like myself, Jamie Moses. You can reach out to us. We will support you, we will believe you, and we'll stand up for you and we'll fight for you. You know, that's our job, is not just about government and bills and legislation. My job as a human being is also to recognize the struggles that people in my communities face and to make their journeys easier, right? Easier than it was for me and as easy as it can be for them. So thank you so much for that question.
It's just because like we have experienced like some youth bringing this agenda forward, and like it was really hard to deal with it, and there was no like ways we can engage and tell them like, you know, this is the reason and how you can articulate these kinds of systematic barriers and put it forward, or like you can see, or like, you know, just talk to your MLA or something like that, because it's really very invisible, soft, and like to the extent that you can't read it, so that like it would be tough for the youth to just bring that and then articulate and put it in a way that can be addressed. So yeah, thanks. Thanks.
You know, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm really glad you raised that, because it is hard. It is hard, especially when you're young and you're not quite sure how to deal with those situations or what to do about it, how to articulate it, how to explain it. And it is really important for us to talk to each other about these things when they happen, so that we can support each other. And, you know, and I always say that I'm here to also help people get opportunities, right? If you want to pursue something and you need support, reach out. Like at this stage in my life, I've had so many different jobs and I've done so many different things. And we, in our roles, we build a lot of relationships. And so if there's an opportunity that you want to pursue or support that you need or anything, always reach out, because we can connect you to the people who are going to help get you there, right? And we can help you articulate and express maybe a challenge you're going through or something that's happened, and make sure that you're supported. I am aware of the time. I have to go to another event at 8 o'clock. There's a vigil this evening. And so I just, I want to make sure that you folks are aware. I do have to leave in a couple of minutes.
That's okay. So yeah, I think we are about there. It's almost 8 o'clock, but you know, I had a very good time listening to you and, you know, learning from you. And I hope all our participants were able to get something out of this session. So I just want to, again, thank you so much for coming here. And we hope that you are going to be somebody who we can see at Bilal more often. And especially because, I mean, I know it's difficult right now because everything is virtual, but, you know, hopefully when things, you know, open up again, then we will see you there. And I'm hoping that in the next election cycle that we will get more youth involved and we'll take ideas from you. And I know that all these wonderful, you know, young people here are, you know, inspired by you. So thank you so much again. And we'll see you again next time. So, and for the youth, I just want to say that next event is on July 8th at 6:30 again, and we'll send you who the speaker is next time. So
all right.
Thank you. Take care.
You folks are amazing. Thank you for your amazing questions. They were awesome. Just awesome. Okay, take care.
So much.
Take care.
Uzoma.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Humira, can you stay behind?
Yeah. Qadra, I saw that she had her hand up. Maybe she left. Yeah, she left.
Oh, she left?
Yeah. So anyone else who wants to maybe say something, final thoughts? What did you think? Anything that was a takeaway for you, something that you learned, some insight that you had? If you want to share, maybe just share it quickly with us. So it's open for you. What do you think of the event? Do you want to see or talk to more, you know, office holders so we can learn more? Who would you want to see next time, maybe? So just quickly share your thoughts before we end in a minute. Yes, so Zahra says yes. So you found it interesting, found it beneficial? Good, good. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
All right.
probably if they have any question that they just want to bring forward as an agenda, and then we can invite guests so that like we have similar sessions. And it could be like need-based, like from the participants rather than like we letting the agenda to be set.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, hopefully you will talk to your, Umul Khair or antenna, your facilitators, and tell them, okay, what do you want to see next time, and who do you want to see? Education system, okay. So Zahra says somebody from the education system. All right, we will see who we can get. Are you saying somebody who's like a school board trustee, maybe?
So is it about the bill or is it something else? Like, can she make it specific? Like,
Yeah, school board trustee. Maybe, yeah, we should look for somebody from our school division and see who we can get. All right, that's a very good idea. Thank you for that suggestion. All right. Well, if no one else has anything to share, you can go enjoy the sun outside maybe a little bit, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
bye-bye.
So we can stop the recording and
Yeah.